highest to lowest. Yes, Ted?
Yeah, not to throw a monkey wrench in, but I noticed on at least one question, I think that a little bit of a miscount, because I think whoever marked X, I think did it as a vote.
I did. And then
Okay.
I put initials back afterwards, after the fact.
Okay. So the X's can be ignored. Okay, that solves the problem.
Please ignore them, please. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You eagle eye guys, I tell you. Okay, I'm getting a weird message. I'll get back in. What have you had a chance to look at these rank orders? This rank order, do you want to take a minute to look at that? Nina, what do you have?
I just want to apologize to the group. Things have just blown up for me recently, and so I'm here to the extent that I can be helpful, but I really have not had the opportunity to dig back into this document the way I would have preferred. So feel free to ignore anything I may contribute as being less than fully informed at this moment. I'm going to mostly listen and only chime in if it's really, I feel like there's some burning issue, but I don't feel fully prepared today, so I apologize for that.
Okie dokie, not a problem. Oh yay, hey Jack. Jack, we're looking at the document that Elise worked out using what we had done in our last meeting and putting it in rank order by the number of votes. And we just thought we would start there. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is the order that they would be in the report, but it does give us a good indication of where we all stand as to one mind as far as what we do think are some of the most important things. And Elise, I said in the last meeting that I don't think I'm going to vote unless there's a tie that I have to break. Big deal. Okay, so let's see. So this first one, obviously, we need to, and what we also talked about at our last meeting, Elise, was that some of these recommendations will be gendered down, broken down into its shortest format, but some may require some lead-in information or some bullet points underneath to fulfill it out. But the actual recommendation we want to try to make as short and succinct as possible with a standardized format to them. So I know that this was a big discussion last time. So we're all basically in a big agreement that all of these boards and commissions need to have one point of contact with the city, and that person is the one whom not only do the board chairs and the board members go to, but the liaisons go to keep everybody on track, on point, in sync. So is there any other information that we want to add to this this first one that you feel needs to be added so we don't lose the information before we move on to the next one?
I think this one is pretty well written in terms of a starting point.
Right, I do too. And it doesn't look like anybody has anything else. I'm carefully watching your eyes as you go through the screen as you're reading, y'all. Okay, let's go down to Elise has raised her hand.
Yeah, I guess I'm just hoping like out of this, we can sort of get to a point where that each of our recommendations kind of looks like this first recommendation that we have. And so I'm hoping that maybe during this meeting, people might volunteer, or we might assign to different people, like, okay, you're going to take this sort of concept that we've started and kind of workshop it into something that looks like the first one there.
Well, that sounds like a plan. Let me mention something that I mentioned to Patrick and Alan earlier today, and y'all can be ruminating about that as we move forward too, is that I see this final report to City Council as having 6 parts. Don't freak out. 1, we've got to have an introduction. 2, the overview of the past member survey, which both of those we've already kind of done in the first report we did to council. And then in using that overview of the past member survey as kind of a template overview of the liaison survey, our recommendations, a conclusion, and then an appendix. And so, and the appendix is only there. It could be just links to the deeper data for those 2 wonky wonks that want to go into and dig real deep into some of this. But I think it's important to give them that background so that people, if they wanted to, can check our transparency and our unbiased application of what people were saying. Does that sound kind of like y'all are thinking too? Okay. Ted, what have you got?
Yeah, I was thinking that the most important thing is the recommendations, and that after a brief introduction, it go right to the recommendations, and the rest of it becomes appendix.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm not wedded to any order yet. I'm just thinking these are the
Okay,
blocks
yeah, right,
that we need to be thinking about as we move through this.
right. I also wanted to say that I agree with Elise. I don't think we should spend time in this meeting trying to wordsmith these that do that offline and just sort of get agreement on what we're going to include.
Right. Okay. And this column over here assigned to, if anybody wants to, raise your hand and say, oh, I'll work on this one a little bit more, or I'll work on that one. Patrick can put your name right there. And what I'm thinking of is, we start, I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit, but starting with a verb and then moving into what you're saying, implement, change, develop something, whatever, and then move into the recommendation. So just be thinking about that as you jump in and say, yes, that's the one I want to work on. Nina, you had a question or statement? You're on mute.
My apologies. I would like, not getting into the details of specific recommendations, but I would like to suggest that we keep in mind that these recommendations really have 3 target constituencies. One is council, one is city staff, and then one is board members and leadership. And I think that when we finalize our list of recommendations, we should structure them in such a way that it's clear who has the associated rights and responsibilities with each of our recommendations. What order we do that in is surely open to discussion, but that it be clear who we're laying this recommendation at the feet of, and what the attendant responsibilities associated with it look like. Because we're really trying to do a comprehensive fix, is my feeling about this. And it needs to be clear that we're not just turning it over to council. Here, you guys take care of implementing all these recommendations.
Right.
No, we really have separate entities responsible for that.
Right. I think the group is very clear on that we know that it should be you've got to have an active verb in there. You've got to have who is responsible for it. And this isn't a strategy, so we don't need to go into timetable and anything like that, but just an active, what's the action that needs to be taken and by whom? And maybe even that should at least get us on a very good start.
Well, what's the outcome that's desirable? What's the goal? And then what actions are we recommending? Because we need to tell them what they ought to be aiming for.
Right. Alan?
Because these are pretty high level recommendations, I think the priority needs to be with city staff and city manager and council, and least with the board chairs and commission chairs. They're not going to make the change. It's up to the city administration and council to implement these recommendations. So I think the message is going to those two groups rather than boards and commission chairs. That's just my opinion.
That's a good point, Alan. I do think there are a couple in there that address some things that board chairs need to do, but that's going to be at the direction of city council or their staff liaisons, basically. We want you to take this training. We want you to learn how to do this or participate in these admin meetings or something like that. So that's a good point. So as we start to really fine tune this I think will become clearer to each of us about how that plays out, and we can get a first run through on the finalized verbiage of these and then start finessing the language, I think. Good point. How about the second one, Patrick? I don't know if we can see the whole box on that one.
Yeah, we can see the whole thing.
Okay.
Before we do that, does anyone want to volunteer for the first item, or are we good with the language here?
I'll take the first one.
Does anyone else want to work on the language for the first? Just raise your hand or give me a react if Ted, is that you're saying you also want to be part of this? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So second one is invest in hybrid meeting technology. Require all public meetings to be held in a hybrid format. Patrick, is the expert, is saying, I'm indicating high support for this recommendation, primarily around the new suggestion to require all meetings to be held in a hybrid format. When you say new suggestion, you're talking about what city council is saying, Patrick?
I'm saying that the second line here was added at our last meeting and was a new recommendation. So I'm indicating that I gave this 5 votes because I feel that aspect of this would be quite transformative.
I can't imagine. I do think that we need to define what we mean by hybrid, because that has a low level and a high level, at least from what I've started to, when people talk about it and they say, and I'm going, oh no, that is not what we do. We have this and this and this and this and this. So I think that we should be sure and define what we mean by hybrid. Would you like to work on that one? Okay, thank you.
I would be happy. Does anyone want to join me in working on this one?
Patrick, I can do that with you.
Okay.
Okay,
Any
now
others?
to the next one.
Yeah, well, this is Jack. I, I wrote this one initially. I'll be happy to continue to wordsmith it.
Jack, I'm concerned about the 4 or 5 years turnover. That seems like a very long time.
Well, the reason I laid it out that way is rather than burden either the, whoever, one thing that has to be worked out is that who would be conducting these reviews and who would be involved. And I didn't want to burden someone to do it for all boards and commissions every year or even every 2 or 3 years. So I'm thinking if it were broken up into doing, say, one board or commission every quarter, then they would cycle through about every 4 years.
Oh. Okay. All right.
I just don't see this as, I mean, this is sort of a, you can prioritize. And in fact, I would think that we could, based on the surveys we did, we could even prioritize those that ought to go first. But
good point.
I don't think we should suggest that they all be done at once or that they all be done every year or anything like that. I think it should be a recommendation that they be done at some frequency where they get cycled through every few years, where every board gets reviewed.
Nina, you had a comment, and then Ted, go ahead.
I'm inclined to concur about having it be 4 or 5 years. What is the average term that a board member is appointed for?
From my experience, it's 3 years typically is the term
That's what I
length.
was going to say.
And they cycle within the membership, so they're staggered within the membership. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it seems to me that there would be a large percentage of participants who might never actually be part of an evaluation if you didn't do it a little bit more frequently than 4 years. So I would say that the reevaluation should be tied to the term of service for board members, so that, a board that has a quick turnover needs to be reviewed more frequently, because we know what happens when there's a lot of turnover, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So theoretically, if you have a board with 9 members, you're going to have 3, 3, and 3 is going to be your turnover if they all complete their service.
Yeah.
So you would have each board member, if you did it every 4 years, would have 2 times that their board was reviewed when they were on. No, 1 time.
Yeah.
Well, or depending on what, well, it could be as many as twice, depending on when they enter into the cycle. But they would at least have 1 time. But I don't know if all of our boards have a minimum of 9, which I don't think they do. There's some that are smaller. Ted and then Elise.
Yeah, I was going to volunteer to work with Jack on this, and also addressing what Nina just said. I think it's more critical to evaluate the mission of the board itself and how well they're pursuing the mission. Not so much a performance review of board members, but like now. The board members are going to affect how the board is functioning, but I think the attention should be on how the board is functioning rather, and maybe secondarily, if at all, how members, individual members are functioning within the board.
Good point. Can you put that into the notes too, Patrick, at the bottom there, just as a reminder? Elise, you had a comment?
I was just going to add that while the term length is typically 3 years, members have the option, or they can like reapply once their term ends for a maximum of 2 terms, making 6 years. And if you started serving like someone else's unexpired term, then you could have even more years.
Yeah, there's all kinds of jumbled up stuff when you get into the real weeds of it, but at least if it were to work out perfectly, everyone would have one time where they would get to participate in an eval or a review, whichever way you want to look at it. Jack?
Yeah, that's, I would second what Ted said. You know, this isn't intended to review the board members or their performance. It's really to look at the board itself and its mission and goals. And, you know, if it's been taking action, if it has a mission that has expired, for instance, that there's no reason for the board to exist anymore. So I think this is much more a review that the board members can participate in, but they're not required to participate in it, but it's an evaluation of is this board doing what it's supposed to do, and should we continue?
That's my understanding too. Is that everybody else's understanding? Give me a thumbs up, head nod. Yeah. Okay. Yes, we all agree with you on that, that it's the performance of the board, or the performance and the need for the board, as opposed to the board members' performance. Okay, so Jack and Ted, you'll work on that one. What's our next one, Patrick? So we say a process for advisory boards. Do we need to use the word advisory boards, or do we want to just say boards? I mean, because it seems like regardless of what some of these boards have been involved with, sometimes their stuff just never seems to go up the pipeline, or that was a complaint.
I think most of our work has been around advisory boards, even if it's not, even if we use the terminology interchangeably. I think it's fine to, for the purpose of this discussion, label that boards.
Okay, because some of them do actually have advisory in their name, and I don't want people to cop out just because they might think they're not, it's not pertinent. Alan, you had a comment? Oh, he's getting professorial on us with his glasses. You're on.
I agree with Patrick. We need to standardize our language. We did that with the report. The first report we gave the council, we used boards for boards and commissions. And let's drop advisory and just call them boards, as we did with the first report. That way that the two are working in sync with one another. 2 reports.
Sounds good. Do we have anybody who'd like to work on this one? Elise, you and Patrick maybe? Okay, great. Thank you. And I agree with everything else that's in the comments and all. Anybody have anything to add for Patrice and Elise's enlightenment? Okay, down to the next one. Jack?
Yeah, as I recall, we did learn that some boards do have some procedures that get passed on to staff members. So I would think that we might even want to make a note in here that we would want to leverage those that do exist. At least try to make use of them in some way. These do. I'm not going to volunteer to help with this one because this requires, in my opinion, some pretty hands-on experience working on a board, and I have none of that.
I can do this one. It's really not as complicated as it looks at this point because we don't have to do the actual manual. but yes, I can help with this one. And I believe it may state it in another one later, but I think what we're trying to do is you're going to have a manual and it's going to be basically two parts. Part one is standardized to all of these boards and commissions, and then part two would be specific to that particular board or commission so that they would, they have everything they need in one place, and it's actually written down and documented so that there should be no question. Elise?
I just wanted to add, and I wrote this in the section there, but just to summarize that, like these like board specific manuals don't have to be like pages and pages and pages. I actually had a suggestion from another NAC member that was just like, let's put together a brochure and share, like, you know, we have like 3 main working groups. Let's have a little blurb on what each of the working groups are doing. That way someone who's new that joins can like get an overview of what's happening and decide where they want to insert themselves into our activity.
Have you written that brochure yet?
We have not. We have not met since February, March, something.
Oh,
so
really?
when we get
Okay.
back together, we'll bring that suggestion up.
Okay, that's a great idea.
It's a great thing, like a working group to work on.
Yeah, exactly. Next one, Patrick.
I just want to make sure, are we trying to pair up each of these, or I only have you listed on this right now?
That's okay. That's
okay.
Fine. Okay. Scroll down a couple of pages. How forget what the lowest number of votes is. What, we go down to about 4 votes or something, I think. Okay.
I
And there's
ordered
not-
them all the way down to 1 vote,
Oh,
but
okay.
I figure we can start with what's most supported.
Right.
I think there were like 17 that had at least 5 votes. So
Right. Yeah.
that's a lot
I thought the break was at about 5 or so. And it could be that some people just didn't vote, even though they think it's a hot topic, but we'll look at those too. Okay, so make the concept of working groups widely known, I will tell you, in talking with Stephanie Dahl, you know, they really do want to move to this working group. And the reason they want to move to working groups is because working groups basically have no authority. So that was very clear in her conversation with us about a committee that I'm working on that we're not even as high as a working group. So, you know, there you go. So I think Elise, you raised your hand, and then Nina, then Jack. Just go for it. Elise,
I was just saying I'd volunteer to work on it.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll put Elise, and then so Nina, then Jack. Nina, you need to unmute.
The other thing about working groups is my understanding is, depending on their size, but they're not really subject to open meeting laws either. And, you know, does that mean that they don't have to be held available to be done hybrid? You know, so personally, I have mixed feelings about working groups. Just
Patrick, make a note of that. I might ask Stephanie about that before we work on this one, about that. She never said anything about if they were, they probably aren't, because we never advertise the group that I'm working on. We never advertise our meetings. So I bet it's not, but I will double check with her on that one just to make sure. I'll just send her a quick note tonight. Anybody else want to work with Elise on this one?
It's just a comment. Working groups aren't recognized by the city in any way, so I don't think they have to comply with open meetings, is my understanding. Patrick, do you have a reading on that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how they're created. If they call it a working group, but they appoint people to it, it's potentially a public body. I think that's something we could kind of get into when we draft the language of this, and I'm happy to help make sure we clarify that distinction.
But you're saying who would actually be calling or setting up the working group? Would it come from staff, or would it come from the committee or the board and commission?
Yeah, so basically under, and I don't want to take too much time here, but basically for a working group to not fall under open meetings law, it could be kind of discussed that a board is going to create it, but if they appoint anyone to it, legally it becomes a subcommittee, and it should be under public records law. So it's complicated legally, and I think the city's current interpretation doesn't fully align with what should happen, and we should get into those details in terms of how we recommend it. And I'm happy to provide kind of resources on this for the group to review if we want to have a further discussion on it.
Okay.
Elise, are you good with all that?
Yes, I had some other comments, but there were some people before me in line.
Okay. Jack, and then Elise.
Yeah, I'm willing to work with Elise on this once we get clarification. You know, I'm a bit confused, Patrick, by what you said, is that as soon as someone gets appointed to a working group, it's a subcommittee. So what are we? Did we get appointed to this group, or did?
No, we were kind of invited and we just kind of showed up. We weren't formally appointed by any existing body to be here, which is why we fall outside of the law.
we're
Even though
unofficial
we're
in every way.
So
even though we're modeling. Go ahead, Jack.
How many working groups have ever existed under these conditions?
Well, apparently the group of people this has just come up. This is what the one I'm working on. The group of people who oversee the Urban Trail Public Art Collection are really a working group. They're not really appointed either. That's where if they're not appointed either, but they are recognized in a very, I mean, we do have a staff liaison that works with us. So we're in this never land, and we do get a couple of budget line items occasionally, and we do get a piece of art needs to be repaired or something like that. So,
because something that had occurred to me could be included in this to try and maybe redefine what working groups might be, that they would have very specific objectives, very narrow, very specific, very time limited objective, and maybe no budget, no staff support. I'm not sure if all of that definition is already in place.
Y'all keep talking. I've got the actual Bible of city county government here. Let me just see what it says about working groups. That might move us on without other stuff. But let's talk about the next one.
Can I just add quickly that
Yes.
for me, I don't care what gets called what. What I care about is the underlying principle, which is if people are doing work that is going to itself make recommendations within a board or commission, that should be a public process as well. And I think those kinds of deliberations should be accessible to the public.
I agree with you, but what we have to try to figure out is what do the state statutes say? And go from there and see what platform they have established for each of those. Okay.
All I can say is I know that the city was recommending working groups precisely because they would not be automatically publicly accessible. They were overt about that.
Right.
That's correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think one of the main points is that the city has promoted them as an alternative process because it avoids those requirements and thus doesn't require staff support. I think that is already in practice is kind of sloppy, and we here have an opportunity to think of how should they operate. I think you can answer a lot of those questions by making them a bit more transparent. Then you don't have to worry so much about whether you're in the box or not. If you just, like we have in this group, we've done everything in the spirit of open meetings law, and that has served our purpose, even though we're not legally required to do so.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It doesn't look like working groups are actually addressed in this book. But let me look. I'll look a little bit further later.
And Stacey, if you want to talk to me directly about that, I'm quite familiar with NC Open Meetings Law, and I can let you know where my position comes from in the law if we want to do that outside of this meeting.
Sounds great. Okay.
Quick question.
Alan, and
Yeah.
then
So
Elise.
when we're talking about,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. When we're talking about these working groups, how should they be conducted if they are going to be public? Do we also make them available through hybrid technology? So, will they follow the same guidelines we're addressing the boards and commissions? And the same requirements? So I'm just raising that question for consideration as this is refined, this particular recommendation.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Patrick and I are coming from the point, let's see where city council, city staff, what their guidelines are, what the way they look at it. And then we can make our recommendation.
Understood,
by
but then
saying,
they should, yeah, I understood, but I'm just saying that if we do make a recommendation that they should be public, then they should fall under the same guidelines as the boards and commissions and make sure that the appropriate technology is available for them also.
yes. Yeah. If they're going to fall under that, yes.
Okay, I just want to raise that. Thanks.
I'll just tell you, we'll get blowback on that, but okay, that's not a problem. Elise, you had something to say, and then Ted, you can step in when Elise is completed.
So I'm trying to like put a bunch of pieces here together because I hear the concern about the lack of transparency with working groups and this idea that it's going to like subvert just like, public input and that kind of stuff. And maybe I'm biased because I have been on 2 working groups for other boards that I'm on where our intention is not to not be transparent, to to be opaque or to subvert public input or anything, but there's an ability of working groups to be more nimble than the big group that has to have all the stipulations and have hybrid and this, that, and the other. One of the working groups that I'm on is literally just me and one other person, and we're organizing the volunteer of the month, neighborhood volunteer of the month. And like, I'm not sure that like that needs all of the red tape that we're talking about here. And so, and I'm also thinking how like, maybe if we write something in about, working groups don't themselves make any recommendations, but they report back to the board that they're on, and that's the venue in which it is public, without needing to have every meeting be made hybrid and announced, and like, because we're just creating more of an issue that staff is already experiencing. And I understand that part of us were kind of like, well, it doesn't matter if staff is feeling burdened by this. This is the way we need to do it. But like, we also need to be understanding that there is part of this that's not just because staff is trying to subvert public will. Like, part of it is just to be able to have smaller conversations about things offline, not to be opaque about it, but just to get some stuff done in the interim that then they can come back and report.
Right. And I really think, just again, based on this conversation I had with Stephanie, a lot of this is coming from how to have ideas move forward without having to always have staff involved, which granted will have something to do with how are the meetings perform. But I do think that there is a place for not having to have every meeting in a public format with a hybrid scenario, to have two people to have coffee and come up with some protocols or whatever's for something that you're working on that you'll present at your next public meeting that's hybrid and everybody can participate in. Exactly. So I think that we're just trying to, I think probably city staff, and maybe we can help them along with that path, is find that way that is equitable for both members of the community and staff. I think that's where we're going to get the pushy pulley thing. Tad and Nina.
Yeah, I just want to say, and I think we're going in the right direction on this, but that this requires a lot more work. And after you, Stacy, after you hear back from the city, because there does seem to be some degree of conflicting goals between between what our working group wants and what city staff may want. And I think if we do carry this recommendation forward, that it needs to have some parameters attached that sort of put up the guardrails for, when a working group is appropriate and how it is appropriate to act, to ensure that it's not used as a vehicle to circumvent those things that we all want to see.
Right. Nina, then Patrick. Okay. All right. Nina, then Patrick.
Okay. So my understanding is the reason that council did check-ins before they changed their policy is because if you have just two people, there's no open meeting requirements associated with two people meeting and doing work on the fly.
Right.
My argument is much less about public being able to chime in all the time. My argument is about public record, which is when you have a group of people working together to develop a recommendation or a policy or whatever, or do research or whatever, that's part of the, as it were, the paper trail that gets to what gets moved up to the committee and so forth. And that's something that ought to be accessible to the public. How did they arrive at these recommendations? What was the process that got them to this? That's important for the public to be able to understand. As for the full panoply of, a live hybrid meeting, in the case of working group, they're not soliciting public opinion directly during a working group. They're talking amongst themselves largely. And we ought to have technology that's easy enough so that those deliberations could be recorded. And then if someone is interested enough, they can listen to them. But it doesn't need to be everybody having access all the time. So I think that there is a solution to be had here that has low overhead and that doesn't necessarily require staff time at all. I think we can come to some suggestions about that won't raise a furor with staff.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm following you, but Patrick, what have you got to say?
Yeah, I'll just, a lot of what I've said is my concerns have been around the city's use of working groups to this point. But I think in developing this recommendation, we need to figure out where this tool fits and how it can be done in spirit with the stated goals for working groups. So, something I think should be included is if there are working groups, like for one, boards need to not appoint people to it because that creates a subcommittee and that's a legal issue. But if a board creates a working group and nobody from the public knows how to attend it, how are they possibly going to be a part of it, right? So one of the stated benefits of working groups is they can include members of a body, of a board, and also additional members of the public, which I think is beneficial. But for that to happen, there needs to be some process for the public to be aware that this group even exists and where is it meeting and when. So I think if we're going to pursue this recommendation, it would be around, I would call those both guardrails, but also like required steps for them to reflect their stated purpose, which I think would make the work of boards more accessible and also prevent them from just being a replacement for subcommittees with less legal requirements. I think that's what we're trying to move away from, but actually try to make sure our recommendations explore how this tool could be used in a way that's beneficial.
So if members volunteer for a working group, is that different from being appointed to a working group?
I think, yeah, I would say like a formal vote to create a working group and to put specific people on it is probably crossing the line. I think discussing the need to create one and people indicating interest is probably okay. But I would feel better as someone that advocates for transparency for the public. If the point of the working group is people outside the board can participate, then that opportunity should be noticed in some way for it to be legitimate.
Right. And that's how our urban trail thing works. We'll have people who say, I saw that and I'm really interested. And we'll say, well, come to a meeting. And if you want to, stick with this and work with this and help us with this, fine, come, kind of thing. But our meetings aren't publicized on the website, which is the differential. So people who don't know somebody already on the committee would never really know that there is such a thing. So, it is a little closed that way. So it's a lot closed that way. So, but yeah, this one's gonna take some real work. And let me get some definitions from the school and from Maggie and see where we stand from that perspective. And that might give you a box to work within. Hold on, let me make a note. Okay. Okay, we're down to 7 votes. Let's see what we're talking about here. So Elise, because as you say, you strongly support this. This is different than the one above that's about, oh yeah, because that's a formal review of the purpose of the board. Okay.
Yeah, I think we've had all kinds of different discussions about I think we all agree that boards should have more opportunities to present in a public forum, but we've had disagreements around what that public forum is. If it's a time set aside on the official council agenda, or council committees, or council agenda briefings. And so my support is for council committees. So that was what I'm recommending here. But if we want to have further discussion about what that forum is, you
And
know,
every board and commission is tied to a council committee, correct? Or no, we've determined that that's not
not
necessarily true.
currently, but that is something that staff had recommended in their initial proposal, and I also support that. Or, I mean, even if a board is specifically kind of aligned with the council committee, if they have some other topic that comes up that's more appropriate for a different council committee, I think they should have access to the appropriate council committee.
Maybe the real bent of this should be that one, each board or commission is associated with a council committee, and therefore, because of that, they should, have an opportunity to present to that committee on a regular schedule or something. And that would tie the council committee more tightly to these working committees that are out there doing the hard stuff. Does that make sense to y'all?
I think this is also kind of aligning with the coming up with a standardized reporting structure for like advancing recommendations. I feel like these are all kind of intertwined.
Right. And also along with their strategic plan, their priorities, that sort of thing too. Alan and then Nina.
Question to Elise. Are you saying then on a regular basis, boards and commissions should be reporting or give a report to the council committee in addition to I don't know, once every quadrennial report to city council? So both should be occurring.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, like,
I'm trying to relate the two together. The fact that we're the top proposal we were talking about was the fact that on every 4 years or so, a board and commission should be going before council. But you're saying on an annual basis also, it should go to the council committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm thinking that, like, if there's like 6 council committees, there's like 20 boards. So maybe there's like 4 or 5 boards that are aligned with each council committee. So they might have an opportunity like twice a year to go before a council committee and share what they're working on. And so this would be a more frequent, kind of like having a direct forum with them more often than this like big general review period.
Or do we tie this recommendation to the first one we were working on? So we coordinate the two. So not only are we talking about how often we go before council, but also how often does a board and commission report to a council committee? I mean, do you think there should be a relationship between the two then? I'm asking, that's just raising the question. So we're talking about communication in both, with both, the council and to the council committee.
I think the two need to be separate. The, you know,
I'm not saying separate in terms of recommendations, but I'm saying there should be some tie-in together. So
no,
one,
no,
the other.
no. I think they're completely separate things. One is a review of the committee's purpose and relevancy and functioning, and the other is the communication from the committee to, or from the board rather, to city council. And they're, you know, they are very, very different. And I don't think they should be tied together.
Nina, then Patrick.
So I understand, Elise, your concern about scheduling things for council agenda and so forth. I do want to emphasize that I think that it's important that the community at large hear from boards and commissions on a regular basis. And the place for that, like it or not, really is council meetings. Very few citizens are going to follow 3 or 4 or 5 council committees to hear reports from commissions week in and week out, month after month. But I do think it's important, both for the prestige and the higher visible profile of boards, that they be seen at city council on a regular basis. And I think it's important for the public to be aware of their work and to have an opportunity to give feedback in that venue. So, you know, I'm not saying that boards should be obligated to report annually, but I feel like they should at least be encouraged to do so, and that there be space made available to them on the agenda so that they can do that in the highest profile. I mean, those meetings get covered by the press. Those, you know, that's where most people learn about what their government is trying to do for them. And so I would like it to be a recommendation that that be something that is encouraged and promoted for boards to do.
And
Let's be clear that when we're talking council committees and city council and the frequency with which they're before either body, because this is about presenting to the committees. And I think, you know, I have to tell you, I think the committee has some weight here, some power here, that if they don't think the committee has moved any rocks down the road, then there's no reason for them to meet with council if they've got nothing to report, which then plays into our review process of, if they've spent a year and they've not done anything, then we need to then council does need to reevaluate the purpose and need for that particular board or commission. I mean, that's kind of the way I'm seeing it. Patrick, what do you have to say?
yeah, I just wanted to, just for everyone's information, Nina's recommendation about presenting straight to council is on this list. It received 5 votes, so it's lower on the list, and it's obviously very similar to this recommendation. My suggestion for this particular one would be to allow boards to report to council committees and indicate in a recommendation that they have the option to request support from the committee to move a presentation forward to full council. So I don't know if that's that's kind of a compromise step, but that keeps that option open, and I think would reduce potentially the burden on council to have to hear from 30 boards. So my suggestion for this one would be to include that option, just that process, that You go to and present to a committee, you try to get 2 votes to go forward to full council if you think what you're presenting rises to that level.
Nina, would you like to work on this one?
I let me think about it.
Okay. Anybody else have a desire to work on this one? Okay, Patrick, and I can help you with this too. Elise, you had your hand up. There was also another person had their hand up. Did they take it? Okay. Elise, then Ted, then Jack. Okay, go for it, guys.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I like Patrick's kind of compromise here, and that's kind of what I was thinking as well, that it's not like we're gonna disallow boards from presenting at city council, but it is kind of like sort of a stage gate between kind of like before they get to council, because yeah, if they're in front of 3 city council members and those 3 city council members don't think it deserves advancement to council, then, you know, does it need to go there? And then I also just wanted to add that as far as kind of like being out and amongst the public, I do think that people who have an interest in certain have specific interests, they do follow the boards that are involved in that. You know, if they have downtown interests, they follow the downtown board. I know there's plenty of people that follow MMTC stuff. Like there are people, we get comments from the same people like over and over again because they follow our board and our activity of what we do.
Right. For some reason, we follow downtown stuff in this house. I don't understand why. But anyway, Ted, then Jack.
Yeah, I just want to say that I do think that these 2 things, going before committee and going before council, have separate objectives and need in a sense to be treated separately. I think the idea of going before council, and I think the practical restriction on that is that council is only going to be able to hear from 1 board at a meeting. But maybe there can be like a standard slot reserved for board presentation, and it'll be, you know, actually more of a show and tell about the board to make the public aware of, you know, what the board is doing and everything. But if there's any action that is any recommendations that are coming from the board, they should go through the committee and then be carried by the committee to council. And if there's a need for the board to present to city council in order to further the action that is being recommended, then that the committee can get the board on the council agenda. But I see two separate like purposes for those things.
Okay, thank you for that. Ted, Jack, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, forgive me, but I have to look at this from a business perspective, because that's really where I had been involved in these sorts of things. And to me, the board providing a status report to council committee doesn't have to be a final report. It could be just a progress report on things that they're working on, that they want feedback on, official feedback of some kind. If it is a report finalizing some work they've been doing, then the council committee could be, then it could be a request by the board to elevate it to the council. But having a board present or speak to a council committee, to me, should be considered as, it's a status report. It's an update. Here's what we're working on. And perhaps we'd like some feedback on whether we're going in the right direction. But otherwise, it's not requesting that the council take action as of yet, necessarily. It could be, in which case you would request that it be elevated. So I just don't see, the exposure to the general public at the level of a status report, to me, seems to be much less urgent.
Okay. Nina?
So one last remark about this, and then I'll let it go. I do not favor the notion of a board which has a specific presentation or recommendation it wants to make being able to be completely stymied at the council committee level. It's not hard for me to imagine that in the luck of the draw, you end up with a board that has a very strong, very specific, unanimous recommendation about what they would like to see city government do. And then by the luck of the draw, they happen to have council committee members, two of whom don't agree with that, whatever it is. I feel like those citizens who have committed years of their time to working on something in the public interest, if they have a unanimous recommendation coming out of their work, they ought to be, and they want to present it to council, they ought to be able to do that without having to get permission from 2 out of 3 council members on a council committee. And I think it would be a shame to have a bottleneck that would allow that viewpoint, which might be controversial, it might be daring, it might be groundbreaking, it might be present some issues that feel problematic to a couple of council members. But I don't think that's a reason to not make it possible for them to get on city council agenda, especially if it's something that concerns the public interest that the wider public would like to know about, and they might not be made aware of it because they don't follow city council meetings.
Well, but to get on city council agenda, you saw what we had to go through to get onto a city council agenda. It's not that easy to get on the city council agenda. So even I think that we're trying to create a real path that people know that there is a process by which you can, whereas right now people are clueless that they can get onto city council if they go through the right steps. I could be wrong on that, but it seems to me that a lot of what we heard in the past members survey was that they did not know, or they never could get to city council or any of that. And this way, if there is a clear path to that, then they can. Of course, yes, there's always the public comment section that they can, utilize and get. If it's a group of them, they get a little bit extra time. But I think what we're trying to do here is to create a clear path, not to create a blockage. Well, yes, yeah, Ted's right. There's always going to be a gatekeeper. I mean, that's just the way it is. Just not everybody, but trying to make it work for them, and and that these boards and commissions have a little bit higher have a bit higher priority to getting on a council meeting than some fly-by-night group. I mean, I think Patrick and I have a pretty clear sense of where everybody's coming from, and we'll do our best to couch this in such a way that covers all of that. It might have 27 bullet points, but we'll go with it. Let's move on to the next one. It's 6:45. Let's see, we're still on, okay, 7 votes still. Yes, I think this is a good point. I think it is important too. We underline the word after that. This is not discussed prior to somebody being appointed, but it is discussed afterwards because it could influence the way a council member might vote on whether a person can get on a particular committee or not. But I do think that this is part of the whole accessibility concept that and inclusivity and belonging, that we're trying to make it easier for folks to participate. Okay, Elise, it's your baby. Alan, what do you have to say?
Quick comment. What we're talking about here boils down to some kind of compensation. The city right now is struggling enough with trying to give firefighters and police an equitable pay, and can't even seem to grasp their hands around the fact that people earning over $100,000 or more may not necessarily need that boost of 4.11%.
I'm with
I don't
you.
know. I'm sorry?
I'm with you on that.
Okay. I'm not sure how we can go here and put any kind of emphasis or need on this. Not saying it shouldn't be done, but with city thinking, it's almost impossible to even consider this kind of a recommendation right now.
That's a possibility. I do know that the folks who,
Letters, by the way, I've been involved in both, so I've got some skin in the game. Also, boards and commissions through the Civil Service Board. I'm elected by city employees. I've been directly involved with both those groups in supporting their pay raise directly with city council and the city manager. So I have a deep interest in this issue of appropriate compensation. I'm not saying it's some kind of incentive shouldn't be provided, but the city seems to, they don't have a problem coming up with paying for outside consultants, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when it comes to an equitable pay rate and pay scale, they can't seem to think through this issue very well at all. There's too many city employees that are barely making, but aren't making a fair raise, a fair pay in the city of $22.10, has been recommended by
fair living wage.
Living wage, exactly. So, that's my 2 cents.
And I do know that like all the people on reparations were offered stipends, but not everyone's taking it. It would be nice. I think that should have been acknowledged at some point so that your everyday person that lives in the community would know that not everybody's getting a check that's on that committee. That's huge. Alan, would you like to work with Elise on this one?
I'm not sure if I can.
Can I add a note here, please?
Sure.
These are not full-time jobs. The amount of money we're talking about here is a pittance compared to any kind of salary or steady compensation. You know, maybe we're talking about $20 an hour for people who desperately need that kind of support in order to be able to participate in the civic process. You know, compared to the major issues of, and by the way, I'm in complete agreement with you, Alan, on this topic. Complete. I've spoken to council about it. I mean, I'm on record. But we're really talking about, like, you know, maybe $25 for a meeting. And if they can participate from, you know, hybrid, maybe they don't even need that. And it should be on a case-by-case basis, not something that's offered automatically, but someone who asks for assistance. So we're really talking about very, very modest sums of money here. And I would argue that our job is to make recommendations for what we think is best for the functioning of boards, not censoring ourselves because we think that there's such a huge budget issue that they're not going to agree. Let's not forego the opportunity to ask what's right and fair for people when we have that opportunity. We probably won't get another one anytime soon.
I'll just jump in. I agree with Nina on this. I just did some quick math. You know, if we're talking like $30 for a 1.5 hour meeting, there's 20 boards. If there was one person on each board who got this compensation, 12 meetings a year, like we're not even talking $10,000. So I think it is modest, although I do 100% agree with Alan about the pay for our first responders. It's like it's an and situation for me. It's not an or situation. So I do think it would be good here to at least ask for it, as well as I just want to point out that there's a lot of other like in-kind compensation that we can offer as well. And that will, like the stipend part of this will be like a small part, a small subsection under this whole entire compensation package, as you want to call it, accommodations package.
Well, I would like to call it an accommodations package, not compensation, because a whole different mind, even on the child care, it's an accommodation.
I think that's correct. I mean, this would be structured because certain people cannot afford to participate in volunteer hours on a board without compensation for it. Just like certain people can't do so without transportation, childcare, or any of these other services.
So you're
I
saying
agree with-
compensation should still be in the description?
I think it's one of the items we should include, but call it stipends or indicate that it's, you know, to allow people to participate who have financial pressures not every member of the community does.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with the term accommodation because I think it's far more palatable with city administration rather than calling it a compensation package. It might get more buy-in with accommodation. So I would go along with that.
Okay. Elise, do you need some help on working with this one?
I'm happy to have help with it, but I also feel capable of handling it and taking all this discussion in.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so we get down to the next one is 6 votes. This is on, and I think I kind of know how y'all feel about increasing the number of IT staff from the community's IT talent pool for hybrid meetings. Patrick, from your knowledge base, is there any reason, thank you, Patrick. Is there any reason why the people helping with the technology part of a meeting can't be volunteers from the public? There's nothing, correct?
I don't think there's any necessarily like legal or technical reason they couldn't be. I tend to feel that that is a staff role, in my
Yes.
opinion. But I don't see
Yes.
any reason that a volunteer or a member of the public couldn't provide that assistance.
And this may become part of the question, particularly with working groups, that you do, regardless of whether where we end up on meeting notes, accessibility, transparency, and how all that is handled, we definitely want some record of the meeting. And what's the best way to do that? Because I know with working groups, staff is going to say we're not part of that. So I think somehow I don't know, somehow it's got to be, it can't take 3 people to do these meetings all the time. This is what I keep rolling around in my head. And they keep saying it's because of the IT aspect of it. I don't know. But do you want, I would say that based on, we've got 6 votes here. You want to move we want this into the report. We do need to address this somehow because it needs to be addressed. They need to take, staff needs to take some kind of action on this to move it forward. Nina and then Patrick, and I'll be back in just a second.
So the important element of this recommendation is not, in my opinion, not to tell the city how many people it needs to hire with what skills and so forth. I think the recommendation is we need this technology. We need it accessible to all the groups that need to have hybrid participation and meeting recording. Let's figure out a way to have that happen. We don't have the answer ourselves right now, but the goal is to make sure that all these meetings provide these affordances to participants and would-be participants and to the public. And I think we can get lost in the weeds here about who gets hired where or who gets recruited as a volunteer from what pool and how they get trained and all that stuff. I don't think we need to get into the specifics here. We just need to say it needs to be a priority that this technology be available and that there be people appropriately involved with every meeting to make sure that it happens the right way.
Patrick?
Yeah, and my comments are kind of on the same line. I think this recommendation is supported strongly from the feedback from staff in particular who struggled with the technical aspects. So really, we just have to tell the city, increase your staffing and put more IT people in the roles of providing the technical support of meetings instead of adding it as another responsibility of a staff liaison that's already doing 1 or 2 additional things.
Good point. Good clarification on that. Elise?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with what Patrick was saying. I think we just need to make sure that this is big and bold because this was something that staff really felt strongly about. This is something that staff said that we can also really support and move forward. And I think it's really just about shifting the burden from people who don't have a lot of experience in that to people who do have more knowledge. And so maybe that's just training those people better who already have this task so that they can do it more easily. It's not so burdensome to them, but more appropriately, it might just be better to concentrate this burden amongst the people whose background and knowledge really makes them better suited for this responsibility, that being like the IT folks.
Good point. Alan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think the city needs to recognize how inequipped it is with its technology. And not having enough staff, at least staff capable of managing the technology itself. Last month, we had a meeting as a civil service board in the hearing room, first floor of City Hall. You would expect that room, if any, next to City Council, would have the appropriate technology. The IT person couldn't get the video transmission going for that meeting, which was supposed to be a public meeting. And the only thing that could be done was to use a hand recorder to record the audio of the meeting, so it would be transcribed later on for many meeting minutes. Now that's, I don't know how wrong you can get. Again, that's in the hearing room of City Hall, and they can't get the technology working. So, Patrick, you're familiar with what city has and doesn't have, and I think it's a big issue right now that all boards and commissions are facing, let alone any other groups that are meeting in City Hall that want to publicize their meetings to the public.
I agree, Alan, and I just learned that about that room in the past month too. It's ridiculous. Patrick, you have a comment?
Yeah, and I would say, I think technical issues happen, and sometimes alternate workarounds have to be put into place. But I agree that I think the way I look at it is this. Am I freezing? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we're good.
We can hear you now.
The issue as I see it is that the city's shift to even start recording and live streaming certain meetings was done kind of as a, here's what we want to do. Now let's just find some random staff people and throw them in and make this part of their job. And the shift to hybrid is the same way. There hasn't been that thought of, do we need a hybrid meetings team that actually knows how to do all of this? I remember when the city started recording just council committees, it was like they had fire department staff recording ones because it was in the public safety building. Totally not the way you would do it from the ground up. And I think this recommendation calls on them to take that step back and really create the right support team for these virtual and hybrid meetings.
True. I mean, I think a lot of it started because of the pandemic. And just as an example, my church, we did it as a, wackadoodle way of recording it. But now we're saying, okay, this is something that's going to be here for forever. So we need to make this a more permanent, easier to do kind of thing. And I think city council, the city staff should be at that point also. So Patrick, can you work on that one?
I can, and I'd welcome help from anyone that would like to join me.
Ted, Jack, Alan?
I can work with you.
Nina? Okay. Cool, Alan. Thank you. Okay, what's our next one? 7:00.
And I'll just note we have 2 6s left. So if we want to, get down to the end of number 6, we could call that our work for today. We should discuss briefly how we're going to draft these together, what process we want to use for that.
Sounds good. Okay, scroll up, please, sir. Oh, these are baby ones. Okay, I'll do 6. I'll do the parliamentary procedure. Then the next one.
I'll take that one.
The next one, council committees and council should set goals for themselves. Okay.
Wasn't that already folded into something else that we were talking about setting goals and priorities for each board? Wasn't that mentioned in one of the other top ones?
I
We-
believe the top one was around more of a review process, which I think is
Right.
different than the annual goals.
Okay, but presumably you're reviewing against goals, yeah? So I think maybe these things could be combined.
I would like between this meeting and next meeting, I would like to sit down and put together a flow chart or like just a web that kind of shows which ones relate to other ones.
Mhm.
Because when we end up writing this together, it might be good to just like link certain ones together.
Mhm.
Because there's
Right.
also another one further down the list saying relate all goals to a council priority. So like if we decide to make recommendations around both of those, we should really just put them together.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'm in favor, not combining them, but like organizing them.
Yeah, the
Together.
organization would be that they're color coded together, so to speak.
Yeah, I'll put together just kind of like a thing that sort of maps things out and then we can go from there.
Okay. What I'd like between now and our next meeting, look at the rest of the recommendations. And if there is something that you think can be rolled into one of the 6 votes or above, let us know. Or if you think there's one that needs to be raised up, it just by happenstance didn't get a lot of votes, and that could be for a multitude of reasons, not that it's not important. Share that information too. I think each working group, each dyad can come up with their own way of how they want to share the responsibility of coming up with your almost final version of these recommendations. Make sure that it's action based is, a minimum. That there's a responsible party is named. And as per what Nina said, is that there's the outcome. Is in there somewhere, but I'm not. I guess you could say to blah, 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 to ensure that XYZ happens. That sort of thing. Alan?
Patrick, can you send us a link to this revised document? So,
Yes.
and
I mean, it went out with the agenda. It's the same one linked with the agenda. We've all been working on the same one pretty well. But if you want me to resend it out, I can certainly do that.
with these priorities then, and the names who are working on each of the various recommendations. Also, where do you want us to post our revisions on that document, on the Google document, so they kind of stand out as far as the updates?
Um,
I'll leave
I'll-
that to Patrick or Stacy.
Patrick, scroll back up to the top of this document, please.
This far up or all the way
No,
up?
up, all the way up. I think that we can, let's just delete all of this other, save this in one form, what we have right here, right now. And then let's move all this extraneous information out, both at the beginning and at the end. So we have just that one document. And I'll put a place to put your new verbiage.
Okay, so I'm gonna add a note here. Stacy, add instructions for RWG members to add recommendation language. You just add what you want in this section here, and then I'll probably move all of this to the end of the document or get it out of our way one way or another.
Okay. All right.
So, Patrick, you'll update everything, so we'll see a new link then.
It's gonna be the same link, just so we're all looking at the same place. But yes, I can send it out and include basically a recap of what we're doing right now. I'll provide instructions, so if anyone wasn't here tonight and wants to add their name to any of those copywriting jobs, they can do that, and then we'll all add. I would say we can work together to update this language however we like. I mean, probably I would prefer to like exchange emails with people on the ones I'm listed on, or use the comment function right on the side of the doc to suggest different variations. And then when you come up with a final proposal, we'll list it in this top section based on the instructions or organization that Stacy provides.
Sounds great. I would prefer email because I can't get this stuff to go into my email. It keeps going into my spam. So I'll have an immediate notation that it's there. Any other things, Nina?
Yeah, I want to note that although I haven't agreed to be revising any of the specific language things, I do stand ready as we move towards finalizing this stuff. I do stand ready to provide an editorial review and help us come up with a cohesive document with coherent language usage throughout and so forth. I'm happy to help at that stage of the process.
That would be great. Thank you. Anything else?
I'm wondering
Patrick,
when
can
we're gonna meet next.
Yes. Let's see. 2 weeks from now is the 24th. Do y'all want to try to do a meeting then?
I will probably be traveling that day.
Where are you going this time?
To New York to help our son and his family move to Massachusetts.
Okay, that's not as fun as I thought it would be, but okay. All right. Patrick, can you stay on for a second?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. All right, y'all.
So do
See
we
you.
agree to the 24th, even without Ted?
Yes. Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
We will miss you, Ted.
Okay.
Okay.
Does anyone else?
Don't strain your back or anything.
Now we'll be watching Little Ones.
Oh, good. Oh, well, you do have the fun part of the whole deal.
Yeah.
All right, then. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night.
Right.
Good night.